Welcome, Isaac. Yeah, we're looking at Built to Last, Chapter 1, Best of the Best. And just a recap from last week, we saw that visionary companies they are premier companies in their industries that sorry about that. All right. They are premier companies or industrial crown jewels. And what we see is that they are widely admired by their peers. In fact, what we notice is that in terms of the research that they took, they talk about the research, that is Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. And we see that the research that they took, they actually interviewed CEOs, and they asked them not to delegate that the survey to their juniors, but to actually do them so that they can say, what are the companies that you really admire as a CEO? You know, what were in your industry, or one that would be your peer. So the visionary companies are widely admired by their peers. And in last week's meeting, I think one of the things that made for very interesting discussions is the appreciation that not every company is a visionary company, according to the description that is given here by Jim and Jerry, that in fact they are companies that do very well, that outperform the market, but are not considered visionary. So these are visionary companies. They are premier companies. They are widely admired by their peers. They have a long track record of making significant impact on the world around them. And that is, despite the death of their founders or the evolution in the products or services they offer, they prosper over long periods of time. So in fact, in terms of their selection, that is the selection of Jim and Jerry of these visionary companies, they say that at some point when they had come up with like the initial list, they did away with any company formed after 1950. Okay. So they say that if a company was formed before 1950, then it has withstood the test of time and qualifies to be known as a visionary company. So we had this exercise last week, so we won't look at that. Instead, we are going to just consider again visionary companies that they have distinguished themselves. They are more than successful. And I think we were looking at this particular graph where we see if you had invested $1 in the general market in 1926, by 1920, then that dollar would have been worth about $600. Of course, this is the US market. If you had invested it in a control company, then it would have been worth this is sorry, this is 345 600. But if you had invested it in what they call a visionary company, then it would have more than outdone the control company by a factor of 7. All right, that it would have been more than $6,000 worth. So the point is that there are control companies, and what they say about the control companies is that they are not what we call dog companies. Dog companies are companies that are doomed to fail anyway by virtue of their management practices. So you have the control companies, but then the visionary companies greatly outperform them. Well, that's the point there. Then we looked at the myths, and I did that little recap. We looked at the myths, and last week we looked at some of them. And today we can be able to look at now the entire list. So 12 shattered myths and the reality. So according to Jim and Jerry, the myths that have been long or widely held include: number one, that it takes a great idea to start a great company. And they say in their research, what they found, that is in their research and the conclusion of the companies that they consider visionary, that regardless of the founding concept, the visionary companies were less likely to have early entrepreneurial success. However, and that's one of the things that comes out is that even if they didn't have a great idea to start with, they got to a place where they were able to identify their core ideology or their core purpose. When you read the chapter in its entirety, they talk about the fact that not all companies were able to define that from the word go, like from day one, that some of them, it took them about a decade as they are setting up, as they are getting off ground, but they greatly encourage, that's Jim and Jerry, they greatly encourage that if you have not already done so for your business, then please do so. They say that even if these visionary companies didn't identify their core ideology, and that's their values, their purpose, what they stand for, even if they didn't necessarily identify that at the very start, they still did it early enough. That is, for most of them, at around not more than 10 years of being in operation. So the first myth is it takes a great idea to start a great company. And like the proverbial hare and the tortoise, most got off to a slow start, but they won the long race. Myth number 2, great charismatic visionary leaders are behind the visionary companies, and they said that a visionary or a charismatic leader is not a requirement. In fact, that charisma can be detrimental to the company's long-term success. And they gave this very wonderful analogy that the leaders behind visionary companies, they are clock builders, not time tellers. And we had this quotation from Sam Walton of Walmart saying that I have concentrated all along on building the finest retailing company that was possible, not creating a huge personal fortune. Then we had this discussion from this quote from Adam Smith, that it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interests. And we are saying that for the visionary companies, then this does not hold. It may hold for the control companies, which are otherwise successful, but for the visionary companies, they had, it was actually from their benevolence. All right. It was not from regard to their own interest, that they had something beyond maximization of profit or beyond maximization of shareholder wealth. That was not their primary objective, that they pursued many objectives with money being only one of them. They had this North Star, a set of core values, a core ideology, a sense of purpose beyond just making money, a why, that they had a reason for being. And this week, we were discussing with a friend of mine about an institution we belonged to and how we actually did give ourselves. It was how we did give ourselves to the institution, to the ideologies, because they had a strong why. But how we realized along the way they lost their why, and when they did, then other things started to happen that made it no longer to be a safe space. So I think when you're guided by a strong sense of purpose, then it means that you're able to adapt or to adjust accordingly. Yeah, so, I think that's an important point, that paradoxically, they still ended up making more, well, as we saw on the graphs on how they performed on the market, or how they actually did outperform the market. Then myth number 4, they share a common subset of correct values. So according to this myth, of course, let me confess that this may be one that I have a challenge with, or one that I would want to examine a little more, because I think from where I come from, I think that there are correct values, like there is a subset of correct values, what we call in life principles, all right, which are like laws. But anyway, according to the research, because that's what I'm presenting, they say that what matters is not so much what the companies believed, but how much they believed in what they believed. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. That what mattered for the visionary companies is not necessarily what they believed, but how they believed or the extent to which they were totally convinced. So they didn't ask what should we value. They asked what do we actually value deep down to our toes. Then myth number 5, this is 5 of 12. The only constant is change. And Jim and Jerry says that for a visionary company, they almost religiously preserve its core ideology. That ideology becomes a rock solid foundation. They do not, as someone would say, shift from pragmatic bandwagon of the latest trend and fashion. So for the visionary company, that is like a North Star. Then the myth number 6, I'm not sure how far we got last time, but I think I'm sure we didn't. Anyway, let's see. We are at myth number 6. Blue chip companies play it safe. That is a myth. And the reality is that visionary companies are not afraid to make what they call big, hairy, I'm not sure how they are hairy, big audacious goals. And though this is daunting and perhaps risky, it actually excites and challenges the people that are working in those companies, and it creates immense forward movement. So it stimulates progress and proved useful in blasting past comparison companies at crucial points in history. Then the other myth, this one I'm definitely sure we had not covered, is that visionary companies are great for all. And the reality is that they are not a great place for everyone to work. That only those who fit extremely well with the core ideology and the demanding standards. So you see, there's something that they believe in. So if they believe in it and you don't believe in it, then you are not ideal. You may find. So what Jim and Jerry say is that it's like there's no gray area. You either fit or you don't, because what they believe in, it's not so much on a spectrum. It is like a hard, if it's a hard yes or a hard no, that's what it is. So it is demanding. There is no room for those who are either unwilling or unable to fit the exacting standards. Myth number 8, that visionary companies make best moves by brilliance, and reality is that they make some of their best moves by experimentation. That's trial and error, what we call in business studies iteration. Myth number 9, outside CEOs stimulate change. And what Jim and Jerry found is that, in fact, they say that in their combined 1700, like when the companies they studied, their combined existence is 1,700 years. They say in the combined 1,700 years, only 4 CEOs came from outside. And they say that the reality is that homegrown management rules at the visionary companies. And I think that makes sense, especially if you combine that with the fact that not everyone can fit there. Then it means that if you fit, and then you are essentially a good fit even to be the CEO. So Jim and Jerry say that the visionary companies dashed to bits the conventional wisdom that significant change and fresh ideas cannot come from insiders. There's a point that they make towards the end of the chapter where they say that that the approach they took, even though they were looking at visionary companies, those that outperform, the market by a wide margin, they sought to understand the why. They sought to understand the distinction. All right, what they call it find the building. I think maybe we can, if we get to that point, it will be good. Find the building where they say that if you look at all the companies and say they all had buildings, is that what made them successful? But they say in seeking to make the distinction, then and in seeking to understand the drive and the evolution, they were seeking to identify factors that can be applied by a company of any size. So I think that's important to us because we may not necessarily be, we may not be the founders of unicorns, or at least not yet. And really, we may never really build unicorns, so to speak, but then we may find principles that work no matter the size of our companies. We may find things that make these visionary companies really stand out from the others. Number 10 of 12, so these are myths we are looking at. And myth number 10 is that visionary companies focus primarily on beating competition. Reality is that they focus primarily on beating themselves. And there's a story I like. Allow me to tell it. It's from a certain movie, Head of State, by Chris Rock. It's a comedy, and it's a lovely comedy. I enjoyed it. Now, Chris Rock is he's called Mace Gilliam on the movie, and he's running for president, okay, of the US. Now, I'm trying to keep it short. So the Republican candidate starts to play dirty, as happens often in politics, and Mace Gilliam, who is the Democratic candidate, is tempted to also start playing dirty. But then he goes and meets his girlfriend, and the girlfriend tells him, have you ever been on a horse race? Well, confession, I haven't. But he tells him that if you were to watch the horses as they race, as they compete, they have blinders. And the purpose of the blinders to the left and to the right, yeah, not of course, not on the front left, but the purpose of the blinders on the sides, to the left and to the right, is so that as they run their race, they are not seeing the horse that is on the next track. They are only looking at their own track. And the wisdom from the girlfriend, well, thank God for wise girlfriends and wives. But the wisdom from the girlfriend was run your race. Don't focus on beating competition. Focus on being the best that you can be. And what Jim and Jerry say is that the question that visionary companies ask themselves day in, day out, sometimes for 150 years, is how can we improve ourselves to do better tomorrow than we did today? And that's what I was saying. I mean, that's a principle that we can apply, even within our individual lives, that I'm not so bent on competition, especially in this information age where there is a lot that you can see on social media that is not necessarily the actual state of affairs. And that can put us in a state of wanting to compare ourselves with others. But as a principle, if we can take that, and of course, a principle applies across board, can apply individually, can apply for a small company, for a large corporation. And the principle is, how can I improve myself to do better tomorrow than I did today? I think this really spoke to me powerfully, because as we say at Inspire, our mission is to be the best versions of ourselves, So that's great. And myth 11, almost there, is that you can't eat and have your cake. And they say that what they found about the visionary companies is that they don't brutalize themselves with what they call the tyranny of or. So what's the tyranny of or? Is where you say it's the purely rational view that you have to only have either or B, either A or B, where you either have, say, cultural stability or progress, or conservation practices or big audacious goals, or say, I think this is a good one, where you think that you have to choose either between making money or living according to the values, the purpose, the core ideology. And they say that the reality is that for these visionary companies, they embrace the genius of and. You know, they don't brutalize themselves with the tyranny of or, they embrace the genius of and. What is the genius of and? Is where you say it is the paradoxical view that allows them to pursue both A and B. So, for example, they say we can make money while living according to a sense of purpose. And finally, the myth number 12 is that they became visionary by vision statements. And Jim and Jerry say that while they may actually write the vision statements and articulate them, the stature that they attained was not so much because they made the vision statements, but it was because it was not because they were well articulated, but it is because they actually lived them out. Allow me to stop there and be able to welcome us, open up the room for feedback. Most welcome.